Sagat is a serious, intimidating fighter in Street Fighter lore, formerly working under M. Bison as a bodyguard and one of Shadowlu's 4 kings. Being a Muay Thai fighter, his stages take place in Thailand, often in front of a reclining Buddha statue. Interesting that a character known for being part of a notorious crime organization has a stage near the temple of a religion known for practicing nonviolence. But more on this later. While I'll be covering the history and inspirations of this location in real life and stage differences between games, the scope of this video will be mostly limited to stages that contain the reclining Buddha statue, with 3 exceptions. In Street Fighter 1, as I just mentioned, Sagat's stage doesn't have a reclining Buddha statue, but is clearly meant to take place in Thailand. The palette of this stage is very bright and vibrant, consistent with the colors of the temple. Green grass, blue skies, and white puffy clouds, a very tranquil and beautiful scene that your characters are about to intrude on. Behind your characters is a flight of stone steps leading up to a temple with a sitting Buddha statue in the center. This is the most important building with the statue and huge spire on the roof above. The main temple is framed by 2 smaller temples with chofa, or decorative ornaments, on the roofs. On either side of the steps, you have stone statues draped in gold and holding weapons, which are temple guardian statues called yak, who are standing alongside mosaic blue walls. Along the top of the walls are mythological lions called Sing, which are considered the protectors of Buddha and often flank entrances to temples. The gold bell-shaped structure on the far right is a chedi, or Buddha stupa, a temple that stores something holy like ashes of an important figure or holy relics. On the left, you have what could be a prang, which is a type of temple shaped like a tower along with a pavilion. It's hard to say if this area is based on an actual real-life location or was just imagined. To me, it looks similar to pictures of the Emerald Buddha Temple located in the Grand Palace in Bangkok. You have the gold bell-shaped chedi and the stairs leading up to a large temple. Also, these 2 smaller buildings on either side of the main one have very similar roofs to these structures inside, though these are commonly seen at temples throughout the country. There are also inconsistencies like no blue mosaic wall or Sing statues. I'm leaning towards this took inspiration from, but was not directly based on the Emerald Buddha Temple, but possibly I'm wrong here. There may be a lot of temples in Thailand that use this type of setup or architecture that I'm just not aware of. Sagat's theme has an upbeat feel to it, with a counter melody line composed of synth coming in occasionally. But for the most part, all you hear are synthesized gong sounds and other percussion just brewing up a storm. The gong does give it a bit more of an Asian flair, but this song honestly is a bit hard to describe. It's not really melodic since it's too chaotic for that. It's just a jumble of instruments played on top of each other that you're forced to hear on loop. There is a classical type of Thai music played by musicians in a pipad orchestra that is reminiscent of this song. This type of orchestra layers different instruments on top of each other, such as this really unique xylophone called a rana e. I don't hear a xylophone, though to be fair, it's very likely Capcom didn't have the hardware to produce this type of sound even if they wanted to. There's also a type of traditional music played before or during a Muay Thai fight, which also uses classical Thai instruments. Before a Muay Thai match, you hear a song called a srema, while after the fight begins, the music you hear is called flang muay. Both have that sort of chaotic, irregular quality to it. I can't say for sure if it's based on a specific style of Thai music like the ones mentioned above, but it definitely draws heavily from the traditional genre. While at the time of this game's release, we didn't know anything about Sagat, knowing what we do now about him being a future villain, I wouldn't say his Street Fighter 1 theme is outwardly evil or exudes power. It doesn't have a strong enough melody for that. I don't particularly enjoy listening to it, but all things considered, this game had a lot of other things you could criticize outside of its sound design. This stage, much like my feelings on Street Fighter 1 in general, is more so setting up for the next game and stage to come, though I will say generally the environments are pretty well done. I wouldn't say that it's really fun to play, but the stages are very good at capturing the atmosphere they're trying to convey. Street Fighter 2 The World Warrior is the first appearance of the reclining Buddha, which is a defining trait of these stages moving forward. According to the Street Fighter 2 Complete File book, this is where Sagat fights to train Ryu and Ken. Not sure why they specifically mention Ken, since Sagat is generally mostly concerned with Ryu, but my theory is that because they didn't know who won Street Fighter 1 canonically at the time this book was published in 1992, they just put both of their names in there. Strap in for this pronunciation, folks. This stage is based on the statue called Hra Buddha Sagat. It's located in the Wat Lokoya Sutta Temple in the Ayutthaya ruins, which is approximately 78 kilometers or 49 miles north of Bangkok. The Ayutthaya kingdom existed from 1351 and ended during an invasion from the Burmese army in 1767. The civilization is considered a major influence on current-day Thailand, and the ruins are considered a UNESCO World Heritage Site. While there are multiple instances of reclining Buddha statues in Thailand, this one is outdoors and also has temples in the distance, which sets it apart from others. Not much is known about the origins of when the statue was made or the monastery that used to be at these ruins, since they were destroyed during the 1767 invasion. Buddha being in this reclining position is meant to represent him dying and about to enter nirvana, with depictions typically having his head resting on a lotus flower with the open flower representing enlightenment. The flower has been removed in-game though, with him simply leaning on his right arm. You also sometimes see reclining Buddha statues draped in orange cloth, the color worn by Buddhist monks, which explains the cloth on his left arm. This robe is quite embellished with symbols layered on top and an additional white robe underneath with a green trim. These symbols, I believe, are meant to represent different auspicious signs associated with Buddha, but modified as to not directly use any actual symbols. You also have the small bump or crown on top of his head, which is called the Ushnisha, which represents obtaining spiritual enlightenment. The dot in the middle of his forehead is an urna, which is a physical, auspicious symbol and a characteristic of a Buddha. In fact, there are 32 characteristics that define a Buddha, including long ears, which the statue also has. Other notable features in the stage include the temple to the right, which we don't see in the actual location, which indicates that this place takes inspiration from rather than is directly based on the ruins. There are stone pathways laid out and a large palm tree in front, which is taken away in future games, probably because it actually blocks your view. There are rocks scattered on the floor, which actually move locations between rounds. This was done according to a Twitter thread by Akira Nishitani to make it harder for players to use them as markers for footsies or other moves, though this was removed in later games. Also, maybe this is just me, but on the top of the roofs of the ruins, there are these structures that kinda look like crosses on the top, though these could be just part of the spire. They are a different color though, so if they are part of the spire, that's a bit weird. Despite having an entirely different subject matter, this stage has a similar bright blue sky and green grass motif as the last game, perhaps a visual continuity between games. The music is quite different though, and definitely improved, composed by Isao Abe. Similar to before, Sagat's Street Fighter 2 theme doesn't exemplify his evil nature. You have a repetitive percussion track looping in the background with the sounds of bells and synth and added reverb, which gives the song a bit of a tranquility to it. The synth theme layered on top has long holds at the end of each phrase, adding to that effect. It's almost mystical and a bit chill. Perhaps this is reflective of his personality in future games where he becomes a good guy or the direction he wants to go in. I really like this stage. The colors are vibrant and easy to look at, the leaning Buddha is instantly recognizable as Thailand, and the song is hypnotic. It's an excellent base that future games would further refine and iterate on. My old headcanon for this stage before making this video was that if you headed up these steps and went further into the temple, you'd arrive at Bison's stage in Street Fighter 2. After doing some research though, the inconsistencies are a bit too much for me to believe this is true. For one thing, this is a Buddha statue, not a bell. I don't think the real-life temple even has this large of a bell. Plus, this location is called Lamayana Temple according to Street Fighter 2 complete file, so an entirely different name altogether. Bison is not Thai, he's clearly white, so it's interesting that his stage takes place in Thailand. When going through arcade mode, his stage being there comes as a surprise to the player because with the cutscenes in between rounds, you're meant to think that Sagat is the final boss, and the player just happens to be in Thailand to fight Sagat when the real final boss Bison shows up. Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition is pretty much the exact same stage with some minor changes. There is the removed palm tree and some ruins shifted in the background to make up for that blank space. To me, it also looks like the shadows are darker, such as on the ruins and rock flooring, although this could just be my screen. One thing that is very obvious though is the more copper-orange color to the statue. Other Thai Buddhist temples do have gold-leaning Buddha statues, so perhaps this is a slight reference to those. Personally for me, I think the darker shadows don't play as well with the peaceful tone of this stage. I do think it is a slight downgrade from the previous version, but still fits the spirit of the original stage. The Game Boy version takes place at sunset or perhaps sunrise. The sun is peeking out from behind the statue, and because the Game Boy's palette is limited to 2 colors, the shadows are dramatic and pronounced. You can see different layers of sky, and the features like the ones on the Buddha and the tops of the ruin are very well defined because of the white outline around everything meant to represent the light hitting from behind. No temple on the right side though. I think this is extremely well done considering what they had to work with. Digging to the bottom of the barrel here, I think technically Sagat's stage on the Master System of Street Fighter 2 is the Ayutthaya ruins, but the Buddha statue is entirely removed. Normally I would say this isn't in the scope of what we're talking about due to that fact, but it does have the stone paths and the runes in the background, though honestly they just kinda look like Christmas trees with a cross on top because they're green. The green gradient isn't bad though. The exclusion of Buddha here could have been an intentional design choice, or perhaps there was a pixel limit to this game and the Buddha would be pushing it, or maybe it was too distracting to tell your characters from the background with it included. A huge leap forward from the Master System, the New Challengers takes the original stage but visualizes it in higher fidelity with a new color palette. The whole environment leans heavily orange with saturated colors. Buddha's robe is a more vibrant shade of orange, and the green trim is more of a deeper color. Instead of being during the day, the stage takes place in the evening or perhaps morning with the sun peeking over the statue. The gradient in the grass is really accentuated here since it goes from orange to green rather than green to yellow. Despite the sun, there's a hazy cast across the entire stage, with the black colors in the stage replaced by more of a dark gray. There were added buildings in the background on the left side, with them also being much closer and detailed. What might be stairs were added near the feet, though it's slightly hidden behind the temple. All of these changes help contribute to a grander feel to this stage, while still maintaining the serene tone from the World Warrior. The increased tempo of Sagat's theme here does help distinguish it a bit. Overall, it's very similar though, just with a slightly modified instrumentation. The main horn melody is pretty much the same, but the background percussion sounds sharper to me. While there aren't huge differences to the stage, it's more vibrant and eye-catching and very attractive, giving you a new perspective on what it might look like outside of just being during the middle of the day. In Street Fighter Alpha 1, you have 3 characters using the same stage, but at different times of day. Adon has the daytime stage, Dan has the sunset stage, and Sagat's stage takes place at night. The color palette here reminds me of a negative for a photograph for whatever reason, maybe because the statue's face is pretty washed out. The colors create a slightly unnerving effect with the cooler tone background and Buddha's clothing not mixing well with the warm undertones of the statue's feet. The feet here are huge. In fact, the entire statue seems to be way bigger, but this isn't just limited to this game. The size of the Buddha statue seems to be fairly inconsistent throughout the series, except for the stages that are basically the same but slightly tweaked. You could see the swirled toe prints along with a grid-like design on the soles, with the symbols inside the squares being similar to what we saw in the robes from before. This is a reference to Buddha often depicted as having symbols on his feet called Buddhapada. There are so many variations of Buddhapada, and the exact images range wildly from depiction to depiction, but generally these are meant to represent Buddha's life and teachings. The feet are at an interesting angle, like you can only see some of the toes, but the way they're arranged just makes it kinda seem like they all belong to one foot, but maybe that's just me. The robes look realistic with how they're pooled on the floor, but they are quite embellished once again. Perhaps the most creepy thing about this stage though are Buddha's realistic dead eyes and pink lips. He's just staring into the void. You can also see the statue cast a deep shadow on the added stone path, which looks more like a road rather than a scattering of stones like from before. There are small palm trees on either side of the statue, with the one on the left next to what looks like a temple, everything underneath a bright moon partially obscured by the clouds. The song is probably my favorite version of his theme so far. There's synthesized instrumentation like keyboards, saxophone, bass, and drum kit. There's a new keyboard riff midway through the song, which includes a new melody, key change, and call and response section. It's almost like a funky rock version of Sagat's theme. Considering how striking the stage looks, I'm really glad they revamped this song. That being said, I don't think it matched well tonally, since I would expect this kind of music on an upbeat stage rather than a creepy, Halloween-esque one. Despite these incongruities though, overall I think they do a really great job at conveying a more sinister vibe to this one, which stands out to me because you really don't typically see Buddha represented in this way. Out of the 3 color palettes, the nighttime stage to me is the least fitting. The daytime version isn't bad either, though you still get that contrast between the cool and warm tone colors, but the most suitable palette is definitely the sunset one. The floor and sky all have a fiery cast to it, and the oranges and yellows blend together seamlessly and create this vibrant atmosphere. Street Fighter Alpha 2 goes back to the front-facing view along with the sunny theming, making it more of a return to norm, though shifted to the left. Instead of fighting directly in front of the statue, it's looming overhead. The ruins behind it are zoomed in, with one of the temples having the same colorful roof as in Street Fighter 1. This is a bit out of place to me, considering that whatever paint might have originally been here would have long since faded away. These are supposed to be crumbling ruins, not a modern temple. You have added water as well, and while there is water near the reclining Buddha statue in real life, it's less of a lake and more of a small stream. Also, not sure if this is because of the perspective and there's actually something underneath, but it looks like the temples are jutting straight from the water. There are stone pillars composed of small stacked circles and decorative spirals at the top. The pillar design at the top isn't traditional, since they look more like this, which look like lotus flowers, but perhaps they used to have a pointed top but have since eroded away. You can also see that the pillars are made from brick and mortar in real life, not stone. The way these are arranged draws your view towards the center, which is a concept in design and photography called leading lines. The circular stone path leading up to the smiling Buddha also helps draw your attention towards the area with the greatest visual interest. He looks very calm and at peace, whereas in the original Street Fighter 2 stage, I would describe him as maybe resting or sleeping. The way his eyes are slightly curved makes me feel like he has a smile on his lips. The way he kind of towers over your character adds drama, like he's almost surveying the fight. The song here is nearly identical to the Alpha 1 music with very slight differences. For me, I probably would have expected a slightly more chill tune considering the serene vibe of the Buddha, but in general, the stage and theming here is really well executed. There is a slightly awe-inspiring tone considering the angle of the statue, and this is definitely one of the better ones. The Alpha 3 Buddha is in another location altogether, not the ruins that we've been discussing so far. In certain character endings, you can see that the statue is secretly a robot that can shoot a laser and destroy cities using Bison's psycho power. Again, sort of speaking to Bison's connection to Thailand without directly stating it. This Buddha statue isn't the same as the ones in Street Fighter 2, which is technically a sequel to the Alpha games and is quite different. This robot Buddha has its eyes open, and something about the eyes just staring at you is a bit off-putting. There are depictions of him with facial hair in Buddhist art, but an interesting choice considering he's never had it again in any other Street Fighter game. Having facial hair isn't one of the 32 stated physical characteristics of a Buddha, so I'm assuming this is just an artistic choice. He's leaning over the water with his arm partially submerged, and there are scattered lotus flowers along the ground and foreground, as well as a dragonfly. Some of these flowers almost seem to be blooming on the stone pavement in the front, though it could just be that someone picked them and happened to place them there. To me though, they almost seem to be growing straight from the stone below, with the boundary between the lake and the stone being very blurred. From this, I get a very fantastical vibe. Lotus flowers are seen often in depictions of nirvana or heaven in Buddhism, and the pastel colors likewise contribute to a dreamy effect, though I assume this location is still on Earth since you can see the ruins in the back along with a small patch of trees. Heavily contrasting with its visual appearance, the song on the stage sounds nothing like the Sagat themes from the past since, like all Alpha 3 songs, the music that plays is not an existing remix of a Street Fighter theme. You do hear a quick little line that to me is reminiscent of his theme, but that is really the only thing I can recognize. It's very heavy on the percussion and synth with a mechanical factory sound. A cymbal hard hat is constantly in the background, and there are occasional horn sounds. A very intimidating vibe that to me doesn't match the stage, but maybe it's alluding to the fact that this Buddha statue is actually a robot and there's something unsettling about this place underneath the surface. The only appearance of this stage in a crossover game, Sagat's stage in Capcom vs SNK 1 gives you two versions. The first one is orange tinted, taking place at sunrise or sunset, so most similar to the New Challengers version. However, the angle which we're fighting in front of the statue has shifted to where we're on the left side and in front of his elbow. This angle exudes an intimate vibe, almost like he's leaning in and listening to a good friend talk. You can see that the gold paint on the statue has rubbed off towards the armpit and upper arm, maybe some sort of symbolism where Buddha is showing us that he has vulnerabilities too. Again, he's resting in a pool of water, or maybe it's just rained a lot recently. It's hard for me to tell, it could also be grass, but given that his arm looks slightly submerged, I'm guessing water. The trees on the sides frame the whole picture, with the broken pillars adding a bit of visual interest. The sunlight on the stone flooring and the flickering sun glare are beautifully executed as well. Combined with the golden cast all over, this is very meditative. The stage intro emphasizes this with the sound of a crow cawing but otherwise complete silence. Once that stage song hits though, it's the complete opposite. Very much in line with other CVS songs, it's heavily electronic with the synth, but also a rock and roll feel carried by the electric guitar and percussion. There's a dash of Asian flair to this song with the string instrument thrown in, but it's very slight. For the purple version, this stage is unlockable in the home ports only, not the arcade version. You get it by encountering this specific stage, after which you can find it in the secret shop. Luckily though, in the pro version of the game, it's available from the start. The purple stage and song are just tweaked from existing assets, and the music is just one of the main menu songs. Regardless, the way it comes together is just perfect. Perhaps it helps that in the original non-pro version of CVS1, you had to have first earned the stage in order to be able to access it, which really added to that sense of mystique and feeling of pride when I eventually unlocked it. At first glance, it might look like it takes place at night, but looking closely you can see that there's actually a solar eclipse happening, so everything is darker. With the statue being removed, your attention is drawn upwards towards the tower. This tower might be a prong, as mentioned earlier, and this temple over here looks similar to the shape of a chetty. The environment comes off as empty and haunting, with fog rolling into that effect, and the water is so white that it almost looks like it could be fog as well. With a more subdued stage, you have a more chilled tune. The music here is actually what I use in a lot of my non-stage videos in the introduction, and it's just the perfect song. Maybe not the most appropriate for this setting, but I love it anyways. It has a very modern feel with the whispering vocals, sax flourishes, and long synth holds. There are actually two versions to this song as well. The one that plays on this stage has a remix version of Ryu's theme slipped in, which is very tastefully done. The other version plays within some of the menus and does not have the added Ryu theme, but is otherwise exactly the same. Moving on to Turbo HD Remix, this stage has new assets as the game was completely redone, and this is where Sagat's ending takes place in as well. The environment is based on the one from the New Challengers except zoomed in. Being that this is a remake, the rock doesn't move unlike the original Street Fighter 2 stages. The ruins in the back look a lot taller and cylindrical at the top. This change in design and how similar in shape they are makes the buildings feel slightly more modern, not to mention they all look like they're in perfect condition. Considering these are ruins of a civilization that ended hundreds of years ago, doesn't really make a lot of sense. The palm tree makes a return appearance on the right side, along with a chetty and a hedge on either side of the statue. The music was done by the website Overclocked Remix and made by Maze Dude, called Sagat's Moonbike. As opposed to other character themes from this game, this song sounds similar to the original, at least initially. It starts off with a chill vibe with synth holds, light percussion, and a slower tempo, but each time the song loops, it introduces something new. There's a bass piano accompaniment that comes in partway through, which injects significant intensity, which transitions into a xylophone section, and then a funky synth section. There's just so many ways the song changes over time that I can't even describe, so I highly recommend giving this one a listen for yourself. I'm not the hugest fan of Turbo HD Remix's aesthetic if my other Street Fighter 2 videos weren't enough of an indication, but in this case the stage actually kinda works. None of the restrictions of the reduced crowd size or limited animations are highlighted here at all. It was always a static, peaceful stage, and therefore makes a better transition than most. My one criticism of the zooming effect though is that you feel quite cramped, like if your character takes a step back from their starting position, they'll run straight into the Buddha statue. I like the synergy of the song picking up in intensity with the match, and the song and stage go together quite well. For the first time ever, I'm not totally talking shit on an HD remix stage. In a full circle moment, the most recent version of Sagat's stage, King's Court in Street Fighter V, is a direct reference to the original World Warrior stage, but with all the assets modeled in 3D instead of 2D. It takes place at 1:20 in the afternoon and is pretty hot at 90 degrees Fahrenheit or 32 degrees C, in case you were curious. Dan's summary for the stage in the in-game shop is, presenting Sagat's Thai stage. Who could forget that awesome statue Buddha chillin' from Street Fighter 2? The perfect stage for an emperor, right? You'd think given that Sagat killed Dan's dad, he'd have more to say about it, but maybe he's over it. This description also confirms that this is the same statue as from previous games. Buddha is relatively unchanged. The green trim on the robe looks slightly blue, and there are specks of green mixed into the orange robe, but otherwise the color palette is similar. Fitting for an updated version, there's many added details. You've got the return of the big palm tree, though this is in the background and not the foreground, with the top part casting a shadow onto the statue. The clouds also subtly move with the wind. Adding to that sense that this place has been abandoned for a while, there is a yellow plant and little tufts of grass sticking out near the stone path, implying that this place is a bit overgrown. One big change though is that the rocks do not move, unlike the Street Fighter 2 versions. The temples in the back are larger, one with greenery hanging off of it, and they can be seen on either side of the Buddha statue. The section on the left now has stairs which lead up to a temple of sorts, numerous broken pillars which make up a pathway, and palm trees, which again is a throwback of sorts. On the right side, the changes are less prominent. There's a staircase leading up to the building and a row of chetty. Also, this is very hard to see, but there appears to be a forest way in the back. The music for King's Court is a heavily remixed version of Sagat's stage, epic and orchestrated, but also sinister with the vocals and underlying low brass, which fits with what we know about his origins. The main melody is carried by various instruments at different points, sometimes a sitar, a flute, choir, horn, or some sort of combination. There's entirely new sections as well that elevate it to the next level and help build intensity throughout, along with the added low health tune which is played in keys that ascend. I think this is a solid stage, but it does play it quite safe in that it's similar to the original stage with its proportions and theming. To give it some credit though, it does lean into that abandoned ruin atmosphere more with the added details, so definitely improvement on the previous. I also like the song more because I feel it speaks to Sagat's evil side, even though technically he's reformed. This stage was teased when Sagat and the rest of the season's DLC was revealed in the updated intro for Street Fighter V, where you see the leaning Buddha and a palm tree as Ryu and Sagat duke it out. Gross. The only game on this list that's not a fighting game, we see Sagat stage referenced in Asura's Wrath, which is an action game released in 2012 and published by Capcom. In one of the DLC chapters, you fight as the main character Asura and go up against Ryu in a multi-part battle. This stage has a leaning Buddha, though rather than a peaceful looking man, this is a bigger guy who's actually a regular enemy in the game. It's not particularly colorful, it leans heavily on the grays of the temple you're in, with broken pieces of stone and barren trees scattered around. Not to mention, you hear Sagat's theme briefly playing in the beginning cutscene. You could argue that this isn't a Sagat stage since the Buddha is different and Sagat himself is not in this game, but either way, it's clearly meant to be referential to his stages. One other game to talk about, Pocket Fighter or Gem Fighter. I mentioned this super quickly in my video explaining those stages, but you can see the Buddha in the middle of the ocean for whatever reason on the right side of the stage. I would say this is more of a goofy joke where he's sunbathing rather than him dying and about to go to heaven. It's just a quick little nod, but since I'm covering all the stages with the statue in it, gotta include it. Sagat stage has a rich historical context, practically dripping in references to Thailand's long connection with Buddhism. The stages generally are peaceful, and the songs, while sometimes a bit mismatched tone-wise, convey that there's more to Sagat than just the one-note villain. That despite his intimidating demeanor and height, there's something else simmering under the surface. Out of all these stages, ironically, the one without the Buddha statue, the purple CVS1 stage, is the standout to me, but all of these locations would be a charming place to visit while on holiday. This is a place that I could spend hours getting lost in, enthusiastically exploring an ancient civilization and vibrant culture.